Awesome. Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Darryn Campbell. I'm a former Android developer. I'd love to be an Android developer again, but I work mostly in developer advocacy now, which is nowhere near as exciting, I think, as the actual doing of the development. I'm going to be talking about adding real-time features to mobile applications in general. So this was originally a slide deck that was talking about iOS and Android. So I have tried to focus in on the Android specific features as well, because obviously this is an Android presentation. Haven't used this streaming platform before, so hopefully everything goes well. Yep. So we've got a very full agenda. Arguably, I've been a little bit ambitious in a 30-minute presentation, what I'm going to be able to get through. But like what I'd like to do is for everyone to leave this presentation with an understanding of what a real-time feature is, and like a bit of a wider acceptance of real time is not just chat. It can be for any type of use case, any type of application, especially on mobile, how you go about architecting that, some of the challenges that you have, especially on mobile, some of the implementation options. I don't know how far along we'll get with those, but this is the first time I've done a presentation and tried to make it entertaining. Like last time I was doing this, everyone was using memes. No one's used memes in this in this presentation so far, this conference. So I'm the first and maybe the last, but yeah, a very long agenda. But essentially, please leave this presentation thinking that mobile apps are better with real-time features. But it's all very well saying let's add some real-time features in, but what is a real-time feature? And it wasn't until I was putting the slides together for this presentation thinking, well, what other type of categories that this audience might be creating? So I did the obvious thing. I went on the Play Store. I pretended I was going to submit an application. And as you're submitting, you have to choose what category your app is in. And I was intrigued, like how many different categories it can be: dating, events, finance, food and drink, lifestyle, maps, photography. And that's just the apps. Like if you select games under Apple Game, you get a whole new set of categories drop down. Like it might be a casino game or simulation sports. So like my point is you can add real-time features to any of those kind of categories. And I sort of off the top of my head, I thought of a couple of examples there on the left-hand side of the screen. So message being received, like asynchronously. Yep, I've got a message. That's a real-time event. A real-time feature I'm describing as anything that a user can receive in real time. It might be text, it might be an image, it might be something, and then they can take action on it immediately. So some of the other examples, like to be told a stream is starting soon. Maybe you received a notification on your phone that this talk was starting soon. So thank you if you did on that. That was a calendar application. Maybe it's an exercise application. Like another example there, I've got Frank has walked 10,000 steps. Like that would be, I want to share that information with my friends. Like whether my friends care about that is another question, but that would be a feature in my app, like that it notifies people I've done that. But then maybe they're competing. Maybe there's like a leaderboard of how many steps you have done, like what the top walker is, and then if that's updated in real time, this is another like key point I want you to take away from this. By updating that leaderboard in real time, it makes the whole app more enjoyable, more interactive. People are more likely to come back to your application. That's just an exercise app, but like some of the others, it will rain at 1 p.m. a weather app. Well, like it's the more information people have in real time, the better. Like the weather, particularly in certain regions of the world, that could be life or death. If it was like, what was it? Was it yesterday on the 26th? All those tornadoes in the Midwest of the US, that was crazy. Yeah, all the tornado watches. Anyway, so if you take anything away from this slide, it's real-time features. It doesn't matter what type of app you have, it can be made better by adding real time to it. So, and then what I did, and I'm not going to read out this slide, don't worry, but like whichever type of app you're creating, then like find your category in this table here, and maybe there's some ideas of kind of real-time features that you could add in. Like I'll just take an example. Let's say I'm creating a sports application, then maybe I'm streaming a game of football. That's quite popular internationally, isn't it, for this audience? And football, soccer, whatever. And like, I'm not just streaming the game. Like a few years ago, it was realized that we could make the audience experience better by adding real-time features to it. So reactions, people liking, people commenting, people atting each other. Maybe you have separate rooms with separate interests who can all interact. But then also maybe depending on your app, you're adding a gambling feature to your application, and at that point, it updating the odds in real time. So again, this needs to be done in real time. It needs to be accurate. The users need to know what the latest odds are as they're making their bet. Otherwise, they're proceeding with incorrect information. And the other takeaway I'd like you to have from this slide is in my day job, we deal with a lot of real-time customers, and we're working with a lot of gaming companies at the moment. And one of their big, I mean, there's two different types of gaming companies. There's the type of company who will create an application that uses deceptive marketing practices to get you into the app, and then it's addictive, and you keep going back to the application as a user because you're addicted to it, and you're spending money because whatever else. It's manipulating you on an emotional level. Like you don't really need real time features for that, so like that's one thing. But I think as developers, we would rather be creating the kind of apps, the kind of games that users come back to because they enjoy the application. They get something out of it. Something new is happening every time in the app. And like my thesis here, if you can call it that, is like adding real-time features to your game, let's say, encourages users to come back. It encourages a community to be built up around your application, and by having that community, you can like improve engagement with your application. Like community in a game, maybe you have a I mentioned leaderboards earlier on, but maybe it's a lobby and you create a lobby. Well, now you have to let everyone know, let your friends know that you've created a lobby. You have to know if those friends are online or offline. That's again a real-time event that's happening. And if they're online, maybe you send them an invite to your lobby real time. They accept. The game starts. There's real-time events going. Players are moving. Ammo is being picked up. Guns are firing. Shields are ablating, if that's a verb. And then after the game, the leaderboards get updated, and maybe there's regional and global leaderboards, and you compete, and all of this is fun. But it's fun because you know exactly what this person on the other side of the world is doing, who you're playing with in real time. Anyway, I'm belaboring the point now. I think let's assume, for the sake of argument, that everyone now listening on in the recording or live is convinced that yes, I want to have an application that has real-time functionality and capabilities. So let's build it. So what do we have? We have, first of all, we have two people playing our game or using our application. We want to send messages between them. So here's our two devices, conspicuous amount of white space. I would like to apologize because I quite like to have slides with animations in, because just one of my things. So please bear with me here. So yeah, two devices. How do I know what this person's name is and that person's name is? I could guess their IP address. That's not very scalable. We would like many people to enjoy our game, our application. So we're going to introduce identity management. Kind of an obvious thing. Maybe we're using Google SSO as our identity provider, or Twitter or X or whatever else. Some kind of identity. Then more people join. More people have their identity. There should be arrows going up to the identity. This gets a little bit unmanageable because although now everyone has a unique name in our system because they've registered, like I don't know, thousands. It doesn't work if you've got thousands of people all communicating directly from device to device. So you add some kind of server. Let's say we're using Google Cloud. It could be AWS, it could be Azure, it could be whatever else. There's something to mediate between communication. So now, in order to exchange real-time information, you have, if I can show my mouse here, you have like a message going from this device to this device. It goes up via the cloud. This is quite simple stuff. Doesn't easy to understand, but here you've made it a lot easier for yourself, but you've introduced some level of latency. I would argue it's probably acceptable though, because you've highly simplified your architecture. But now we've simplified it, let's make it complicated again. So real-time events, something I haven't covered actually, is some real-time data you want to persist. Like think of messages in a Discord server. So when someone joins a new server, then you want them to be able to catch up on the kind of messages that have happened in those channels, or like see existing channels. You're going to store that data somewhere and persist it. So that's happening in your data store, related to your cloud. There's probably data. There's probably a database that is owned by your cloud provider, and you can do everything under the cloud provider, make things simple, have it like a real-time database in Firebase, so it synchronizes everywhere. But things get better, things get more interactive. Your application is growing, and now lo and behold, we have cross-region. I chose these flags because they're kind of popular well, I'm the UK, so that's why I've got the UK flag in here. But you can imagine a scenario where we're now global, but having everyone communicate with the same cloud, assuming it's one instance, doesn't really scale. So logically, especially like here, you might have a healthcare application, for example. So if you have a application that does healthcare in the US, it needs to comply with HIPAA standards compliance. If it's in the UK, there's or GDPR in Europe as well, and there's also I think NHS standards for healthcare. But regardless, you're storing data, patient data. It needs to be under separate compliance, and make sure your database here supports HIPAA and your database over here supports GDPR. They probably support all of them, but especially because you're going to be talking now between data centers, you have to have that cloud communication. And also, like what was not shown here is the number of devices increase again. And so you're probably going to have multiple points of presence in the US, multiple points of presence in Europe. So the devices need to be clever enough to communicate with the region, the point of the cloud that's closest to them. So that's all very well and good. We've got this running, but we have a conspicuous area of white space. Put some more devices in there. Put some very populous countries. We've gone worldwide. Our app has blown up, or whatever the expression is nowadays. Um, figuratively, of course. So yeah, we're adding users. We add a new cloud instance. There'll probably be different instances, but I was running out of space for India and Brazil here. So yeah, that's all communicating. Things are getting complicated, but it's still manageable. You can see the underlying architecture is remaining the same up until like something big happens. Like maybe you get big in China. I've used this as an example because it allows me to introduce the fact that maybe you can't have Google Cloud in this additional customer. Another example along the same kind of lines, it doesn't have to be China, but maybe your app is so successful that it's being piloted by a major US retailer, for example. But one of the conditions of that pilot is that you have to deploy your application server like logic, to an on-premise device because they don't want your data going outside their firewall or whatever else. Depends on the use case, but it's not. There may be a use case where you have to go off cloud as well. That's what I'm saying. And at that point, you need to integrate between your server and the rest of your mechanism because you want these devices to communicate between each other, presumably. And also, then it needs to have its own another database. If it was China, then you probably want to have an additional identity provider on the left-hand side. Yeah, and your face quickly becomes like my little emoji man's face here, and it's a lot. It's doable. We're developers. We like a challenge, and we can kind of build out this framework architecture, but it's not easy. Not easy to do. Um, I want to change. I want to change angles a little bit because I did also want to make sure I cover some of the challenges that are unique to mobile applications, and I'll just go through these one by one. The application, I think everyone is fairly aware of this as an Android developer. I've been an Android developer since Gingerbread, and over that time, it feels like every single iteration of Android introduces more restrictions on what I can do in the background. In fact, one of the features was literally called background restrictions. And so like you're fully aware that when your application goes to the background, it is unable to do any work. So you can't do any real-time features when your app is in the background because it can't have any CPU cycles unless you're using what's it called, work manager, but that's not real time. So yeah, the way around that is by sending push notifications, FCM messages. You're probably doing that already, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that a push message is a substitute for a real-time feature. It can help, and I'll come to that on the next slide, but it's not. They're not quite the same. So just bear that difference in mind. Another challenge that's going to be unique to Android mobile developers is you're probably creating an application that needs to be cross-platform. Like maybe you're not creating specifically the cross-platform port. Maybe you're doing the Android port and there's another team doing the iOS port, or maybe like you've been called in to create a React Native application that needs to communicate between everywhere. Maybe some of your users will use the web client. But the takeaway I'd like you to use is if you're not building all of the real-time infrastructure yourself, which you're probably not, is like make sure whichever service you use has that cross-platform support or supports whatever platform you may well use in the future. database synchronization. The point here is that not all data is the same. So Firebase, again, I've had Firebase mentioned a lot in this conference, and that's for a very good reason, because most apps will use Firebase in one form or another. Has some very strong database support. It has support for asynchronous exchange through like real-time messaging, for example. But not all data makes sense to store in a database. Some of that data is going to be ephemeral. Some of that data is going to be like get out of date very quickly, and it doesn't make sense to back it up after a certain period of time. So things like a product price database, that makes sense. That you want to cache some of that on the device for quick lookup, and it's very unlikely to change. If it does change, you want those changes to be propagated, but that would be like the price of something changes every week. Whereas other data, like you don't want to store in a database. It's going to be, I don't know, the takeaway here, different data, treat it differently and understand what the different types of data are in your solution. And similarly to that is time-sensitive data. Another use case of real time, we'll have food deliveries, or we're familiar with food or packages being delivered to us and being able to track the driver's location. I know not all apps support this, but many apps will allow you to see the driver in real time. Well, like as a user, I don't care where the driver was 5 minutes ago. I care where they are now. Especially if I'm getting updates at a rate of every 2 seconds, then don't bother telling me where he was 5 minutes ago. And so this is a realization that if data is out of date, then don't present it to the user. If they come back from a background application, don't give them old data, just wait until new data comes in. Again, depending on the frequency that you're exchanging real-time data. And talking of frequency is network bandwidth. So again, as developers, we're very cognizant that we're developing applications that will be used worldwide. And so the point that everyone always bangs on to me about is make sure you aim your application at any kind of device, and devices might be 8 years old, 6 years old or something, so they might not have the strongest CPU, but also don't forget about network bandwidth. I know it comes at the end of a project, but especially if you have real-time features, they're probably going to use a lot of network. It might be exchanging lots of data in certain points. It might be a lot of data in a short period of time, or it might be a small amount of data all the time, which adds up over time. Just make sure you test that with the network bandwidth settings of the emulator. I'm sure you're doing this anyway, but just it's more important if you have real-time features. And then finally, I want you to bear in mind the cost. So as you are building out your solution, you are aiming for the maximum number of developers. I think we all are when we create applications. We want people to use our apps as good developers, and like that's our end goal. However, like that might cost a lot of money, because more people, more real-time capabilities. Maybe these things are not linear. Maybe they're like order n squared or something. And so keep an eye on your costs. Any noddy could create a back-end architecture which scales globally and like to hundreds of thousands of millions of devices if money is no issue. But yeah, money is an issue in the real world. So just bear that in mind. Your maintainability, support, all considerations. So a couple of words on the implementation. There you go. I told you I like my my animations. Let me just look at them. I've got loads of time. So SCM, I touched on this earlier on. I don't want you to go away thinking, oh, I can just implement all of my real-time features with cloud messaging, Firebase cloud messaging, push notifications. What did it used to be called? GCM, Google Cloud Messaging, because the user can turn it off, which is kind of the obvious one. The Android might decide to throttle your application again. So another one of those features which, as you've been a developer over the years, you've seen Android apply more and more restrictions on what the application can do in the background. Like it can, there was sort of application buckets, and your application has to have been launched for the first time, and you can only send so many high priority messages. So messages aren't guaranteed to be received, even if they're high priority. And like if you send too many high priorities, then the priority is lowered automatically by Google. If you're doing everything right, then Android might just decide to not deliver your message because of network reasons or whatever on their end. So they very clearly do not make it guaranteed delivery. In fact, I had a customer, which I'll come back to if I've got time, who wanted to implement a real-time messaging for doctors and nurses in a hospital. So it was very, very important to him. Yeah, it wasn't a male developer to make sure that they received that message like from the alert, and so they were having to implement their own system, and they had their own set of issues because they couldn't use FCM, obviously. So again, I don't have too many more animations. The other thing, Firebase, I mentioned Firebase had that real-time database. I was Googling around because I wanted to make sure that what I said in this presentation was accurate. And I think I Googled for Firebase real-time chat application. And there was a tutorial. It's really good. And it sort of said, well, this is how you get up and running. We're going to use a real-time database. We've got two devices, and I'm going to send a message. And what that's going to do, it's going to write to the database, and then the other device is going to listen to changes in that database. And when it sees them, it will know that there's a new message, and it knows to update its message list. And that way, all these both devices are in sync, and that worked really well. I didn't, the screenshots looked good. I didn't actually run through the tutorial, but I was thinking, well, that was all right, well and good, but how would I implement things like message threads and private conversations and message reaction, moderation, access control, emoji, like I don't know, all this stuff that gets very complicated if you're handling it all within like a database and doing that. So I guess my point here: make sure you're not trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Firebase is great. We probably all use it in some form or another, but like, consider other options, even if you are using Firebase in one aspect of your project. So the kind of obvious one, to go back to what I was mentioning earlier on the slides, is, well, if I want something flexible, then I could just build it myself. I'll build my own real-time infrastructure. I didn't. I had to customize the meme somewhat there because I thought it was going on the internet. Anyway, so you can't do that. Well, you could do, I guess. It's a lot of effort. Everything I mentioned on the slides a few back. But again, bit of an eye chart here. But all of these other considerations are compliance, automatic routing, catching up. Like if your devices, I mean, let's assume you've implemented your real-time infrastructure with SDK support for all of the different devices. It might not just be Android, it might be web, it might be iOS, whatever else is popular nowadays. And so you have to have SDKs for all of that to integrate. You have to make sure that the network behavior, like if your users go in a tunnel or have bad network infrastructure, they go offline, they're what's it called, partially connected, and importantly, authentication. You're probably going to have nefarious, malicious users trying to hack. I hate using that word, but trying to gain access to your application, especially if you're doing something like writing a game and you're exchanging this information. Like that's the first thing you need to watch out for, people trying to do naughty things in your game. Anyway, so yeah, all more reasons. If you want the challenge, fair enough, but all the more reasons to maybe steer away from this option. Some people will say real-time features. Okay, I just want to add like hit chat in this example. So I have I don't know, think of something, a wrestling watching application, and I want my users who like to watch wrestling to be able to chat with each other. Or maybe it's a support, maybe it's like a hotel booking system, and you want a support agent to be able to interact with the user. Probably a chatbot in the back end, but anyway, I might choose to do that by a pre-built chat component or pre-built something component, where this example is chat. So if you can find that component, great. You can imagine in this scenario, it would provide you with a UI message field, and there's an avatar that links off to a identity provider somewhere, and it all hooks in really nicely, and the users can react to messages and they can have a conversation. That's great. Like you've reduced the amount of effort on your part. And if your sprint master, it's been so long since we've done sprint properly. I can't remember the names of them, but yeah, if they say you've only got 2 points, sorry, to do this feature, then yeah, you're probably going to be using a third party, but it's not customizable very much. It's not like if you want to add new features, you're limited by this third party company. You're locked into the architecture of that component. So good luck, but maybe it's an option, but it might not be if you want to really think of the full gamut of real-time features that you need to add to your applications, and then think of how you would achieve that by these self-contained units. Maybe, but maybe not. And then finally, I would posit that the best approach and the most flexible approach, other than building your own, is to use what some would call an infrastructure as a service approach. I'm never keen on these AAS kind of acronyms, but there are lots of services that exist that offer real-time features over a publish and subscribe model. If you're familiar with MQTT or services built on top of MQTT, RabbitMQ comes to mind, and there's another one, then that's great. Like they would work. Bear in mind though, and this comes back to actually, this is very specifically the example I was giving earlier about the doctor nurse needed to send messages and like they couldn't use FCM. They were going to go down an MQTT approach, and the problem they had was when the application went into the background, the MQTT client was deprived of CPU cycles, so it couldn't subscribe anymore, and then it couldn't get the messages through. So I mean, we worked around, we found a solution for that. But ideally, your platform that you choose should have support for Firebase Cloud Messaging, so that when you're thinking about your user's experience, you want them to use those real-time features and like, but they can't use them until they launch the app again. So send them a push message to get them to the application, and now they've launched it, they can have those real-time interactions. So it would be better if the platform that you choose has the ability to do all of that without having to worry about like integrating with Firebase to send the message and then like having a separate work stream to actually send the real-time features. So yeah, that would be good. Also, all of the infrastructure considerations, it's all built for you. This is not a sponsor talk, so I won't belay the point, but I would recommend the company I work for, obviously. I don't just say that because I work for them. Honestly, I wouldn't work for them if I didn't believe in the product. So I work for PubNub. They are a infrastructure as a service that delivers a publish and subscribe infrastructure. And don't just take my word for it. Genuinely, I was searching for inspiration for this presentation. So I searched for real-time, Android real-time communication. And the top result was this question on Stack Overflow. And Shubhank Gupta, who I'm probably butchering the name of, I apologize, but like a couple of years, 2017, okay, I don't know, I was married that year, so a long time ago, it was listed as like, I recommend this third-party service. So yeah, that's who I would recommend. We do all of this. This isn't a sponsor talk, so I won't belay this. But yeah, everything I've mentioned in this presentation is handled by PubNub. But with that, if you need to find me, I forgot to put my handle at the end of this slide. But luckily, my mother had a very strange way of spelling my name. So if you Google me, that's a horrible thing to say, isn't it? But you will tend to find me, especially if you search Darryn Campbell Android. Add me on LinkedIn. Always happy to get in touch and talk about any kind of Android development. Like I said, I used to be an Android developer. I'd love to be one again. But yeah, or if you have any kind of real-time interactive feature needs, then please get in touch. I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you. But with that, I think we've got like 3 minutes. I'll go back to questions, please. I think you're muted, Jane. Oh, I can unmute you, but the power of the, there we go.
Sorry, I was just thanking you for the very insightful presentation that you have just shared. We have a few questions, but in the midst of the presentation, you reminded Anne about Socket IO when you were talking about building your own backend, rather. Then there's another question from Mambo Brian. While we would love to have real-time features, what would this look like for low-end devices?
What would this look? Well, I mean, it depends, like what kind of features you're talking about. Like even something as simple as a chat, just sending a chat message, reacting to that chat message. It doesn't have to have a large footprint. I was recently putting together a couple of applications for a hackathon, and like it's not. I mean, I'll speak specifically in terms of what I have experience in, but it's not the SDK that my company provides that was adding the bloat to those applications as the hackathon that I was creating. It was all of the other frameworks, like the visual framework that I was adding in. I won't speak negative about some of the other topics that we've had in this conference, but yeah, certainly, what was it? And then I had like a React app that I was building React Native, and that application ended up being like 20 megabytes more. So often you can add real-time features as long as you do it and architecture in such a way that you're not bloating your application, then it can be done. But I don't have the specific experience with like the very low end devices to speak authoritatively. That would be my answer though.
Okay, thank you for that. There's another question from Todd. What are the advantages again over Firebase or Supabase?
Ooh, I've not come across Supabase before. I can speak for Firebase. Advantages. I suppose if I've not come across Supabase, I can't compare the two. But I would say that every platform has its own advantages and disadvantages, and yeah, I can't give specific answers without launching into a sales pitch of my company for Firebase over Firebase, and I don't want to do that. So yeah, so not much of an answer. I apologize on that, but yeah.
Okay. Then there's another question. I really wonder how we can mix between real-time data and historical data.
Yeah, sorry. It all depends how you're storing it. Like we have customers who export a lot of their data through Kafka for their historical data, and then they do analytics on that afterwards. But before it goes through that Kafka stream, they perform like some filter. Like there is some aspect of the data that they know needs to be stored, and then that gets exported. But the filter would filter out anything that doesn't need to be historically stored, and everything else just remains in the system until it disappears after a day or 7 days, however long you've set your retention period on for your real-time databases.
Okay, I hope that answers their questions. Thank you so much, Darryn, for answering our questions and the insightful session. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for the opportunity.